Коллеги, это заседание проходит в режиме.
Dear colleagues, this is for attribution session, and in this room we have TV channels and journalists. But again, as I said, this is for the record, this is for attribution session, and would appreciate it if the media stick to the previously agreed arrangements with respect to your role during this session. Now we start our final session of the conference. Last but not least, the session is to deal with the situation around the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, intended to settle the situation around the Iranian nuclear program. The situation around JCPOA has become much more dramatic since we met last time, in October 2017. Back then, we mostly talked about successes, about the achievements reached thanks to the negotiations. Today, it appears clear that the risks related to further demise of this agreement, which I believe to be the greatest achievement of the non-proliferation regime over the past 20 or even 30 years. Now, the risks are very high indeed. The breakthrough that has been achieved thanks to diplomacy is at risk. We are facing the risk of all those agreements to be scrapped, and we see that with every month the situation gets more and more aggravated. So the topic for today's session is as follows: what could be done in order to diffuse the tension around this agreement and, if possible, to sustain the agreements? What could be done to engage all the countries that contributed to the JCPOA, perform their roles and meet their obligations in full? Now, let me remind you, if we fail to do this and if JCPOA is not sustained, it is highly likely that this would make a very negative impact on the overall Middle East situation, and I think this would also significantly affect the non-proliferation regime as a whole. Moreover, calling spade a spade, fewer countries would believe that arms control and non-proliferation agreements could be sustainable. So the risks related to the possible collapse of the JCPOA are very high indeed. And why don't we talk about how such risks could be mitigated? I would like to give the floor to Deputy Foreign Minister of Russia, Mr. Sergey Ryabkov. Dear Anton, it is a pleasure to be back in this room. In fact, I heard that discussions yesterday and today were very rich and useful and proactive, so thank you very much indeed for giving us all a chance to have a candid and open and professional discussion. I think that this session will also be as professional. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, let me say a few words in terms of why we believe we are in a situation the way it looks now. The fact that the current U.S. administration decided not to honor its obligations under the JCPOA and the aggressive campaign pursued by the U.S. to discredit and undermine the nuclear deal and blatant violations of the 2031 resolution on the part of Washington and barriers put by Washington to implementing this resolution by other countries. Well, all those facts put together presents dire and long-term challenge for the international community, with a center at UNSC, whose decisions mandatory for implementation. The JCPOA demonstrated how global issues could be addressed. Maybe this is why some parties don't like it. The JCPOA allowed to remove all the questions that IAEA had to Iran. Well, I think many would love Iran to have no nuclear program at all, but those dreams cannot be realistic. Besides, they run contrary to the NPT. JCPOA confirmed the rights of Iran to pursue a peaceful nuclear program. At the moment, the Islamic Republic of Iran is the most terrified country in the world, and I cannot state the same with respect to those who criticize Iranian program and put obstacles to the JCPOA implementation. The United States delivered a blow to the agreements that rightfully can be considered one of the greatest breakthroughs in diplomacy. JCPOA is based on the principles of staged approach and reciprocity, and now the balance is upset. Already now it is very difficult to restore stability and to make JCPOA workable. We don't know what will happen in the near future, and we understand why Iran asks the following question. Well, the U.S. is doing whatever they want, and JCPOA does not yield any benefits for Iran. So what's the point sticking to this nuclear deal in the way it was negotiated and signed? Once the U.S. unilaterally withdrew from JCPOA, some balance was maintained, although not without difficulties, and to a large extent that was thanks to the Iranian stance. Iran, for many months, exercised restraint and did not follow the U.S. suit with dramatic steps. But now, Iran has to suspend some of its obligations that go beyond the agreement. And the Iranian leadership on many occasions confirmed its readiness to get back to the parameters agreed back in 2015. And this could be done very quickly. As soon as legitimate concerns with respect to the U.S. and Europeans' failure to live up to their commitments are relieved. So IAEA confirms that this is something that could be done from the technical standpoint. Now, the collapse of the JCPOA will result in another major crisis in the Middle East. And the situation has been fairly tense recently there. And Tehran is perfectly aware of this, and they exercise caution. In fact, JCPOA implementation is a rare example of a constructive agenda in the Gulf area. All sound forces in the world agree that JCPOA is still relevant and has no reasonable alternative. There is no other way except for pursuing the agreements reached in 2015, and we are convinced of this. This is the only way to safety. This is the only way to maintain viability of the nuclear deal. Iran has no nuclear weapons, and we hope Iran will never have such weapons. Therefore, the international community set up a reliable regulatory and legislative framework and necessary verification mechanisms. Those were developed not for Iran, not against Iran, but for all non-nuclear states. And if somebody starts to question the effectiveness of the system, well, it means that the entire non-proliferation regime is being questioned. But again, this is not a reason to crash JCPOA and pose Iran as a global threat. Iran, for many years, has been a participant of the non-proliferation regime in good faith, and it keeps a very high level of cooperation with IAEA and fulfills the obligations under the Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement. In fact, Iran even announced that it will be able to speed up ratification of the protocol in case U.S. sanctions are lifted, and we can only welcome this. At the ministerial meeting on the JCPOA in September in New York, all the current JCPOA participants in a joint statement confirmed their commitment to the comprehensive agreements reached back in 2015. The key objective, as of today, the way we see it, is to create a conducive and insulated from attacks environment to support the implementation of the agreements related to the redesign of Iranian nuclear program components. At each such stage, some specific agreements are necessary, framed by a special commission that would help us support each other and respond to external challenges. The situation around JCPOA requires complete commitments on behalf of all the participants. Now, we do whatever it takes in order to sustain JCPOA. A similar position can be expected by the Iranian party from the European participants, especially with respect to the lifting of sanctions. We support efforts aimed at de-escalation of tension around Iran and bringing JCPOA into the initially agreed framework. We hope that the Macron initiative would allow to sustain the JCPOA. Any additional ideas unrelated to Iranian nuclear programs have to be discussed separately without revisiting JCPOA and without changing the parameters initially agreed by the 5+1 in Iran in 2015 and stipulated in Resolution 2231. Immediate stabilizing measures are necessary. This is something that our efforts should be aimed at. Within the framework of the existing agreements, a lot of efforts are being exercised in order to eliminate obstacles put by the American party trying to prohibit the rest of the world to implement the resolution of the UNSC. In fact, the U.S. forces other countries to oppose the sanction regime imposed by the U.S. In fact, the U.S. Even threatens with sanctions to IAEA and the UNCS. Neither U.S. nor the rest of the world will benefit from this. And this is fraught with an open conflict, and the consequences may be grave, and these could be global. This would affect the economy, this would affect commodity markets, so it is in the interest of all the countries to sustain the JCPOA and ensure a conducive environment for its sustainable and full-blooded implementation within the specified time schedule. I hope that this is something that Washington would also realize. Thank you. The next person to speak would be Director General of the Department of Arms Control and Disarmament, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China, Cong.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to be on this distinguished panel and have the opportunity to share with you China's views on the Iran nuclear issue. A few days ago, the Iranian government announced the fourth step of scaling down its commitments under the JCPOA. While noting that some countries have expressed concerns on Iran's latest moves, some of which we share, I wish to remind people of two basic points in this regard. First, the root cause of the current tension of the Iran nuclear issue lies with the US policy of maximum pressure against Iran. The situation was originally calm until the US reimposed its unilateral sanctions on Iran and impeded implementation of the JCPOA by others through long-arm jurisdiction. As a result, Iran has taken measures to reduce its nuclear commitments because it cannot enjoy the economic benefits embedded in the nuclear deal. This is the basic logic behind the Iran nuclear crisis. Second, Iran's reduction of its commitment under the JCPOA does not pose substantial nuclear proliferation risk. Iran is still fulfilling its NPT full-scope safeguards obligations and has repeatedly reiterated its readiness to reverse course at any time once economic benefits are guaranteed. Having said that, one cannot fail to recognize that the current situation of the Iran nuclear issue is heading towards a dangerous direction, and therefore the international community should make concerted efforts to seek a political and a diplomatic solution. In this regard, China wishes to make the following points. First, the fundamental principle of multilateralism should be upheld. The JCPOA is a hard-won victory of multilateral diplomacy reached through negotiations and endorsed by the UN Security Council. Preserving the JCPOA serves the good purpose of safeguarding multilateralism, safeguarding the authority of the UN Security Council and the international order based on international law. In this connection, I wish to recall that at the Foreign Ministers meeting in September, in the margins of the UNGA, all the remaining parties to the JCPOA reaffirmed their commitment to the full and effective implementation of the JCPOA. Second, the balance between rights and obligations under the JCPOA should be maintained. The nuclear deal not only limits Iran's nuclear program, but also guarantees Iran's economic benefits. The balance disrupted by the US withdrawal from the deal and the resumption of sanctions on Iran need to be restored. We encourage our European colleagues to make more efforts to ensure that the INSTEX achieve tangible results, expand the coverage of INSTEX to energy fields, and open this up to non-EU countries at an early date. We also support any diplomatic efforts conducive to safeguarding the JCPOA, including the credit line mechanism proposed by France. The priority in this regard should be to push the US to lift or at least ease sanctions against Iran. Otherwise, no mechanism could get off the ground. Third, disputes should be resolved through dialogue and consultation. So instead of finger-pointing, all parties should seek to resolve issues related to JCPOA implementation within the framework of the Joint Commission and refrain from resorting to the dispute settlement mechanism, much less the Security Council. Otherwise, we may risk a spiral escalation. Regarding the concerns on the sunset clause of the JCPOA and the regional security issues, dialogue on equal footing, a new platform could be set up to seek long-term solutions through dialogue on equal footing and on the basis of maintaining the integrity of the JCPOA. Fourth, peace in the region should be the overriding objective of all related efforts. The situation in the Gulf region and the Iranian nuclear issue are intertwined with each other, casting a long shadow on the global energy supply and international security and stability. China calls upon the countries in the Gulf region to refrain from hostile rhetorics and actions and engage in dialogue on regional security issues. Meanwhile, we call upon countries outside the region to promote peace and stability rather than inciting hostility and confrontation in that region. As a party to and the strong supporter of the JCPOA, China has taken a firm position in safeguarding its normal trade with Iran, despite the unilateral sanctions imposed by the US. The modernization project of Araghchi heavy water reactor is a core project of the JCPOA. China, as one of the co-chairs of this project, together with the UK, has spared no efforts in advancing the modernization process. China is also actively carrying out its commitments related to reactor design, fabrication of initial core load of fuel, and equipment supply, and the remarkable progress has already been achieved in that regard. China will continue to push forward the project in accordance with the JCPOA and the consensus reached among the parties. Meanwhile, we hope that all parties concerned could play a more active role in this process and provide more concrete support to this project. In conclusion, I would like to say that the Iranian nuclear issue cannot be resolved overnight. We need wisdom and we need patience. But we are confident that political and diplomatic solutions to the Iranian nuclear issue can be found as long as all parties stay in unity and stick to preserving and implementing the JCPOA. Thank you very much.
Спасибо, посол Фуц.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Fu Cong. The next speaker is Deputy Foreign Minister of the Islamic Republic of Iran for Political Affairs, Dr. Abbas Araghchi.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm so pleased to be invited once again to this important conference. Well, I assume it is very difficult to speak as the last speaker in the last session. So I prefer to talk a bit frankly and candidly about the current situation and to avoid, official statements or official positions of my country. As it was said, a few days ago, we started the fourth step of reducing our commitments in the JCPOA. And this time, we decided to inject gas to more than 1,000 machines in Fordo. And this is our fourth step. At the same time, as all of you know, we have tension in the Persian Gulf. region, in the Strait of Hormuz and beyond. We have had lots of incidents and attacks and everything. The last one was about a month ago when an Iranian tanker was hit by 2 missiles. And we are still investigating who has committed that, and we would respond in proper time and place. So the question is, why we are in this situation? What is the root causes, as my colleague said? Just imagine almost 3 years ago, in January 2017, everything was fine. Everything was in place. Iran was fully implementing the deal, confirmed by reports after reports by the agency. We had peace and stability in the Persian Gulf, freedom of navigation, energy security. We had business people in Iran. Everybody was happy because everything was in its right place. And the whole world was celebrating a big achievement for diplomacy because Iranian nuclear question had been resolved through engagement, through diplomacy, through negotiations. So what happened? That everything changed. Only because one president doesn't like the legacy of the previous president. For that simple reason, everything changed. And we are facing maximum pressure policy. We are facing zero oil policy, while we are totally innocent in this game. We negotiated in good faith. We cut the deal in good faith. We implemented the deal in good faith, as I said, verified and confirmed by the agency. But all of a sudden, all sanctions are back, reimposed, and there are new imposed sanctions. So we have to, first of all, appreciate the point. That's why we are here, and who is responsible for everything which has happened or may happen in the future. I think nobody can question Iran's good faith. After the US withdrawal in 8th of May 2018, we could have immediately withdrawn totally. We could have gone out of the deal, and the deal was finished. But we decided not to do that, upon the request of other participants of the JCPOA, especially upon the request of 3 European participants of the JCPOA. And I wish they were present here. I wish European representatives were also in this panel, or even somebody from the previous participants to the JCPOA. They asked us, the Europeans, I met them in the 7th of May, 2018. They asked us, please stay in the deal for a few weeks, and we will find practical solutions in order to compensate the absence of US in the deal. Practical solutions in banking, in trade, in insurance, in transportation, in investment in Iran. There are 11 areas that they have committed themselves to find practical solutions so Iran can benefit from the deal. So because it is obvious, when you are in a deal that there is no benefit for you, there is no reason for you to remain committed to your obligations. The balance is the deal is totally lost. Everybody knows. Every deal is based on a gives and takes, a balance between gives and takes. Now Iran gives are exactly the same. Iran takes are zero. So why we should stay in the deal? We were asked for a few weeks so they can repair, they can compensate. It didn't happen. We waited for 1 whole year. 1 whole year. We gave chances to diplomacy. We gave chances to Europeans to create practical solutions as they promised. But it didn't happen. So in 8th of May 2019, this year, we said enough is enough. We cannot stay in a deal which has no benefit at all for us. But again, we decided to do it in a step-by-step manner, to do it gradually, and to give 2 months period between each 2 steps. So still there are chances for diplomacy. Still there are windows for diplomacy. For those who insist to resolve this problem in a peaceful way, we have given them enough chances. 1 whole year at the beginning, then 2 months after 2 months periods, so diplomacy can work. And since there has been no solution for this problem, and the US sanctions have been intensified, so obviously we continue in this process, we reduce our commitments, and as a matter of fact, we soon may come to the end of this process because there will be no remaining commitments to be stopped. So we have shown our good faith, our goodwill, and we hope that our good faith would be reciprocated, but it didn't happen. There is one point here I need to emphasize. What Iran is doing in reducing its commitments is in fact exercising our right inside the deal. We are not doing that only to retaliate. We are not doing that as a policy of, as some colleagues may call it, less for less. No. This is our right, according to the JCPOA, according to the dispute resolution mechanism in paragraph 36, that we can seize application of our commitments in whole or in piece. Let me to read it for you. Maybe some of you haven't seen or haven't read this. Paragraph 36, which is for dispute resolution mechanism, has actually introduced a mechanism that if a country complaining that the other side is not fulfilling its commitments, it can trigger that mechanism, going to the Joint Commission and then to the Ministerial Joint Commission. And when everything is exhausted, and we exhausted the whole process, then the paragraph reads, if the complaining participant deems the issue to constitute significant non-performance, then that participant could treat the unresolved issue as grounds to cease performing its commitments under this JCPOA in whole or in part. And this is exactly what we are doing, to cease application of our commitments in part. Why in part? Because, as I said, we want to give diplomacy still chances so we can save the deal. This is my point. We are reducing our commitments in order to save the deal, not to kill the deal. The purpose is to protect the deal. The purpose is to save the deal. This is why we have started from easy steps, going gradually to more difficult steps. This is why after each step, we are emphasizing, as we did a few days ago by the President, that we are ready to reverse everything back to its original position, that we are ready to go back to the full implementation of the deal. So we are still complying with the deal. This is a very important point to notice. We are not supposed to go back to the full compliance because we are still complying with the deal. We will go back to full implementation of the deal. So we are still complied. We are still in compliance with the deal. We are just exercising our right according to paragraph 36, and we are ready to go back to full implementation once our benefits in the deal are guaranteed. So this is our position. We are now facing with maximum pressure policy of the United States. Let me to tell you, and hopefully to American administration, that maximum pressure policy is a failed policy. It hasn't worked. It hasn't reached its objectives. We had some turbulences at the beginning, yes, but now we have adapted ourselves with the sanctions. And we know how to live with them. In fact, many consider in Iran the zero oil policy, including me, that zero oil policy by the US is a blessing for our economy. It's a golden opportunity for us to get rid of oil in our economy, to get rid of dependence on oil in our economy. And this is not working. We are not trying to draw our budget, design our budget based on not selling off any oil. At the same time, maximum pressure policy has united people and political elite. All political factions are now in the same line. And anti-American sentiments are strengthened, whether they like it or not, in Iran. And I can tell you, maximum pressure policy has produced only maximum resistance policy by Iran. And that would certainly continue. We don't let maximum pressure policy be successful. Otherwise, we cannot live in the future. Otherwise, we have to live under pressure all the time, and we don't let it happen. What is the solution? I believe the only solution is to have a ceasefire in this economic war. This is an economic war. And this is not my wording, this is President Trump's wordings, that he has waged an economic war against Iran. So if that is the economic war, we don't negotiate under the war. We don't negotiate under maximum pressure. There should be a ceasefire first. And ceasefire is for both sides to go back to their original position. We are ready to go back to full implementation of the JCPOA if the US is going back to January 2017 and lift all imposed or reimposed sanctions. And then there would be a favorable atmosphere to negotiate on how to implement the deal in the best possible way. Thank you so much.
Спасибо, доктор Araghchi.
Thank you very much, Dr. Araghchi. 3 clear, detailed presentations. We have up to 50 minutes for Q&A. Let me just say for everyone in the room that the subject of this session is possible steps to prevent further escalation and sustain the deal. I'm sure many of you have other questions not related to JCPOA that you would like to ask, but let us focus on this, possible steps to sustain the deal. We also welcome questions to the comments that have been made in this room today. If you have a question, if you have a comment, please raise your hand, and I will give you the floor. We're going to collect 4 or 5 questions, and then we will ask the panelists to make comments and provide answers. Shahil Shah.
And thank you, Deputy Foreign Ministers Ryabkov, Araghchi, and also Ambassador Fu. So whilst I definitely agree that in an ideal world we would have Europeans and also Americans on the stage, I think having the 3 of you actually offers an opportunity to explore the more bilateral relationships between your countries and how that can support, say, the European efforts that are being made. So my first question is to Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov and Ambassador Fu, and it basically, from a European perspective, it's very difficult because it feels as though the onus is completely now on Europe to try to implement that economic quid pro quo that underpins the deal. My question to both of you is, what can Russia and China do to complement those efforts? Because Russia and China are more suited to address some of the economic challenges posed by US secondary sanctions than Europe is. So what would those be, and what can you do, for example, in terms of importing oil? And then my other question is to Deputy Foreign Minister Araghchi, and it has to do with the Hormuz peace endeavor, which is meant to help, bring progress to the regional de-escalation that is enshrined in Macron's 4-point plan. So what do you see as the lowest hanging fruit for that peace endeavor? How do you foresee the foreign ministry to carry that forward and actually bring it to the region at a working level? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take second question from here.
Thank you for the panel. I'm Abdurrasudif Salar from Institute of Middle East Strategic Studies in Tehran. My question is to Ambassador Ryabkov. The question is that Russia is very much relied on the European initiatives, like, as you said, the Macron initiative. But Russia is also a guarantor of the deal, and Russia's political initiative here, it's just, I think, basically rhetorical. This is a kind of critique that exists a lot among Iranian scholars in Tehran that are working on the Russian-Iranian bilateral relation. And what is the Russians' view on a real political initiative to save the deal?
Thank you. Adlan Margoyev next. Here.
Thank you for the opportunity. Adlan Margoyev, analyst at the MGIMO University. I have a question for each distinguished panelist. To Dr. Araghchi, the first one. It is believed that the Iranians will stick in large part to the JCPOA until the presidential elections in the United States, in hope that a Democratic candidate might win and return to the deal. While few people remember that in 2021, that will be the year of the end of the second term of President Rouhani, and presidential elections will take place in Iran. I know diplomats don't usually comment on domestic politics, but my interest here is and concern to what extent the Iranians and the leadership might lose interest not only in the JCPOA, but in constructive engagement with the agency and in interest in the NPT. My question to Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov is, should Iranian leadership decides to reduce the level of transparency and its engagement with the IAEA, to what extent that might complicate the Russia-Iran nuclear energy cooperation partnership? And to Ambassador Fu, the question is, as a major partner in trade and investment of Iran, will China consider the chance to build its own trade mechanism similar to INSTEX or a different one with Russia or separately, maybe among BRICS countries, to continue to sustain the partnership with the Iranian economic field? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take one more question and then we'll give the floor to panelists. Please, Ali Vaez.
Thank you very much. Ali Vaez from the International Crisis Group. First of all, Anton, congratulations on another successful event. These things get better and better every time. My question is to Ambassador Araghchi. Would you be able to clearly state if we continue on this path of escalation and you take your 5th step or 6th step and the Europeans decide to trigger the dispute resolution mechanism of the deal that within the 65-day time frame that is devised in the agreement result in a snapback of all the UN sanctions, how Iran would react? Thank you.
Thank you. I will give the floor in reverse order. So, Dr. Araghchi, if you will start, I would appreciate that.
Well, first of all, let me to appreciate our Chinese and Russian colleagues. And I have to appreciate Russia and China as two good partners for Iran. We have developed very good bilateral relations, and still we enjoy good bilateral economic and trade relation. And I can say that if it was not because of Russia and China, we have had left JCPOA maybe months ago. and I have to emphasize that our consultations with both China and Russia are taking place regularly, and we are quite happy about the level of consultations between the two countries. On Hormuz peace endeavor, or HOPE, as it is known, this is an initiative introduced by Iran for peace and stability and security in the Persian Gulf region and the Strait of Hormuz. Well, peace and stability in the Persian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz is as important for Iran as it is for any other country in this region. We are an oil-producing country. Obviously, we need to have a peaceful, secure Persian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz so Iran can produce and sell its oil. So the logic is quite clear. But peace and stability in every region should be for all. We cannot have peace for everybody but one, and peace includes peace and security includes economic security, energy security, and everything. The initiative which is introduced by our president has different goals and objectives and principles. Most important ones are the idea or the principles of non-aggression, non-intervention, freedom of navigation, and energy security. And we believe that based on these four principles and other principles that we have mentioned in our paper, we can come to security arrangements in the region with the participation of all countries inside the region, and we can enjoy peace and stability. We have already sent letters to the heads of the states in the Persian Gulf region by our presidents, to each and every of them, even to those with whom we don't have political relations, in order to show our good faith. And we hope that we can establish a forum so countries of the region can sit together and discuss about important questions of security and stability in this region. And we appreciate that our Russian colleagues have also introduced a similar idea, and we think that the both ideas can complement each other. This is something for further consultations between Iran and Russia. On elections, I have to tell you and emphasize that elections in the US or in Iran have no place in our calculations when it comes to our national interests and national security. And we have actually exercising our policies regardless of who would become elected in the next presidential election in the United States. We are following our own national interest, and we certainly do that. And I think we have still about a year to go for the election in the United States. But if we cannot manage, if we cannot find a solution for the JCPOA and the current crisis we are in the coming months, I think we will soon reach to the end of JCPOA, even months before the US election. On the question of snapback, I think we have made it very clear for all JCPOA participants that a snapback and return of previous resolutions is Iran's red line. If Iran's award, after all sorts of engagements and negotiations and cooperation with the agency, is to go back under Chapter 7 of the Security Council, it means that our nuclear doctrine has been wrong, and we have to revisit and reconsider our nuclear policy and doctrine. Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador Fu?
Thank you. Let me explain how we see China's role in maintaining the JCPOA. I think it can be summed up actually in three dimensions. One is that we are maintaining a normal relationship in terms of trade and import and export with Iran, including the import of oil. And so we despite the difficulties created by the imposition of the US sanctions, we are trying our best to maintain our normal trade relations with Iran. And secondly, we attach importance to the Iraq modernization program. And we are actually making a lot of progress, and several contracts have been signed, and some even have been implemented. And we are also making progress in terms of the supply of equipment, and we urge also other countries to join us in terms of the supplier of equipment in the modernization of the Iraq project. And the third aspect is our support to some of the diplomatic initiatives, like the INSTEX. Actually, you mentioned the mechanism. We are actually urging the European countries to open up this mechanism to non-EU members, and we have said very clearly that China is ready to join. And also we are urging the European countries to open this mechanism, to expand the coverage of this mechanism to energy sector. And we are also ready to join in that respect. And also, as we said in my opening remarks, we also support the French initiative. And we believe that that initiative on the part of the President Macron is a genuine and a sincere diplomatic effort, and we are providing political support. And when the conditions are ripe, we are ready to provide the more substantive support in that respect as well.
Sergey Alexeyevich.
Да, спасибо. Thank the audience for these very focused and thoughtful questions. I thank you, Ambassador Araghchi, for recognition of both our close dialogue and interaction, and also mentioning what we have developed and introduced as our own ideas, how to promote more security dialogue and confidence-building measures in the region of the Persian Gulf. Let me say the following. We are fully committed not only to maintenance of the current level of our multifaceted interaction and cooperation with Iran in different areas, but to expand and deepen this. We have numerous specific projects in the area of economy, be it simple trade, be it more elaborate schemes of interacting in areas that are, let us be frank, vulnerable for extraterritorial disruptive and destructive effects of the US-imposed sanctions. And we also intend to continuously progress on a series of infrastructural projects that would bring our two neighboring countries ever closer together. And I would say that the more US tries to make our lives difficult in this sense, the stronger is our resolve to find ways how to succeed and how to make this cooperation immune for this very toxic activity of the United States. It brings me also to mentioning of the fact that our cooperation in the area of the nuclear, which is, again, an advanced and proliferation-proof, if I may use the word, as recognized by international community and International Atomic Energy Agency, is moving forward and will continue. We are hopeful, and our Iranian neighbors are very aware of it, that things will not that bad that it would be necessary for decision makers in Tehran to consider things like, you know, looking anew into the full implementation of the additional protocol or associated things. We speak very frankly, and my friend Abbas knows that this is the position of Russia. But in a given situation, I don't think it will in any way rock our very firm view that this cooperation, which is mutually advantageous and very forward-looking one, should continue. On the issue how much Russia relies on the European initiatives or activities, well, I should recognize we now face a considerable lack of fresh ideas how to navigate through those tumultuous, stormy waters of current situation, and in this regard, the ideas and initiative of the French president are very welcome. We support those. We wish this initiative to succeed. Meanwhile, we work at all appropriate formats and on all appropriate platforms, be it Vienna, New York, bilateral interaction, to ensure that everything is done in order to prevent further deterioration of the situation politically, militarily, diplomatically, and first and foremost in the sense of preservation of JCPOA as one of the cornerstones of the modern architecture and one of the considerable achievements of the diplomacy. For instance, we understand how difficult it might be to deal with the issues that currently constitute an agenda for some at the UN Security Council. We should warn against any miscalculation on the part of the Russian resolve to stay firm in defense of the JCPOA and in defense of Resolution 2231 that effectively put an end to the series of previous resolutions that contained sanctions measures against Iran. Those resolutions have fulfilled its goal, its declared purpose, which was to make sure that the Iranian nuclear program is being looked into from the perspective of transparency, and the exclusive peaceful nature of this program will be in place. Those goals are achieved, so there is no reason to even consider a return of the UN Security Council sponsored and approved sanctions on Iran.
We do have time for one or even two more round of questions. Tariq Rauf next, and Maria Sultan after, and Bob Einhorn.
Thank you. My question was to Deputy Foreign Minister Araghchi. It's been reported in the media that so-called hardliners in Iran, including former President Ahmadinejad, are recommending that the Iranian government find a way of a negotiation with the Trump administration on the JCPOA. And I was wondering whether you had any views on that, or whether such a negotiation could reach a version of the JCPOA called the TCPOA, the Trump Comprehensive Plan of Action.
Maria Sultan next.
Thank you, Anton. My question is especially, it's actually to the entire panel. Looking at what has happened to the JCPOA, is it actually about Iran's nuclear program, or is it actually about US affair of influence, which is being tested on Iran? And the real test here is that whether China and Russia can actually help Iran to deal with this, where the entire thrust of this action is being posed against Iran. Because if you look at the broad spectrum of sanctions which have been put in place, none of these sanctions which the United States is now putting against Iran are just specific to just one area. From oil and gas to the Iranian armed forces, the spectrum continues to expand, including taking away the Iranian banking structures and banking mechanisms from the SWIFT code. That means it's not just about trade between China or Russia or Europe, it's just about strangulating Iran and making it a case that if you stand against the US, this is what happens. So is it really about Iran's nuclear program?
Bob Einhorn.
Bob Einhorn from Brookings. Ambassador Fu, you talked about a platform. I think you were referring to a new negotiating platform that could deal with regional issues and JCPOA deadlines. To use Deputy Minister Araghchi's terminology, what are the gives and the takes of that platform? And any of the other panelists would like to comment on it, that would be fine.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, then we will be back to the panelists, and then if there are any further questions, we'll be ready to take them. But now we'll give the floor to Ambassador Fu first, and then if other panelists would like to react, you also have to. Ambassador Fu, please.
On the platform, and we all know that there are talks that some concerns are expressed in terms of the sunset clause of the JCPOA, and also some regional issues, including missiles. And our view is that, subject to the agreement of Iran, we will be happy to see that some sort of negotiation can be launched to deal with the regional issues, and so that some of the concerns can be resolved, and that we would support this process. Of course, that depends on the regional countries, and so that is basically our position. And on the strangulation of Iran, indeed, we do see this from a wider perspective. But I think the crux of the matter now, and the most urgent task, is to preserve the JCPOA. And by having this multilateral agreement preserved, which was sanctioned by the UNSG, UN Security Council, and we think that will go a long way towards maintaining peace in the region. Yes, we are concerned that actually the US is seeking a regime change policy, in my personal view. So we are opposed to that, and we don't think that that is the right policy to take. And that is also one of the reasons that why we resist and we're opposed to this maximum pressure policy on the part of the US.
Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov.
Maybe a word on sunset clauses. Let's remember that JCPOA as such contains elements that are valid indefinitely. So, in a sense, it's constant sunshine and no sunset, like country undertook a commitment to refrain from reprocessing, which is, for this audience, a very central, if not an essential, aspect of what might be of concern. With respect to other sunset clauses and ideas with which many people, quote unquote, play currently, I would say that this is exactly an element of give and takes which made the deal possible. In absence of any sunset clauses, in my personal view, there would be not an opportunity to conclude this deal. So if now people want to change this and extend something, I believe they should consider what the other side, so to say, could get in exchange. At best, Now, I'm trying to look at this from some distance. I refrain to talk on political issues. Here, like in many other situations, everything currently is overly politicized. So, but if we brush away the political part and talk on methodology of diplomacy, then it's extremely unrealistic to believe that anyone in a serious mindset would consider something as central and as essential as a change of periods for which there is no return to normalcy without any appealing offer. What can be achieved in exchange? That's so natural, and you know, it's nature of a human being. If this is put in question, so I think something is wrong with the very basics, not just of understanding how diplomacy works, but just what human life is about.
Thank you. Dr. Araghchi?
Well, thank you. Let me to add some words on what Sergey said on the question of sunsets. Well, I think he's right. As a matter of fact, JCPOA as a whole has no sunset. And Iran's commitment not to go for nuclear weapons is permanent. It is mentioned in the very first paragraph of the JCPOA that Iran reaffirms that Iran would never, under any circumstances, would produce or acquire nuclear weapons. And this is a permanent commitment by Iran in the JCPOA. And from this sense, JCPOA has no sunset. But yes, there are some provisions of the JCPOA who have timelines. 10 years, 15 years, and in monitoring part, 20 years, 25 years in some provisions. The idea to have time-limited limitations on some aspects of Iran's nuclear program is to build confidence. So it's a confidence-building measure that Iran would limit some aspects of its nuclear program for a certain period of time in order to build confidence. You cannot expect any country or expect Iran to build confidence forever. And it is clearly mentioned in the JCPOA that full implementation of JCPOA ensure exclusively peaceful nature of Iran's program. And after full implementation, Iran would become a normal member of NPT. So the purpose of the JCPOA is to turn Iran into a normal member of NPT, still committed to all obligations in the NPT as a non-nuclear weapon state. To answer the question which was raised, I think the answer is quite simple. Yes, there is lively debate in Iran how to react to the US maximum pressure policy, but I can tell you that there is a consensus among all decision makers that we have no option but to resist against this maximum pressure policy. And this is exactly what we are doing, and I believe that there is a unity amongst people and decision makers on this policy.
Thank you. We have time for two final questions. Sig Hecker first and Minister Fahmy right after.
Thank you, Anton. Thank you, gentlemen. I need some help. I've been a defender of the JCPOA. In fact, in September of 2013, I had the opportunity to meet with Minister Zarif and actually with you also, when I first heard what you were planning to do in the spirit of the Iran deal. And I was particularly impressed with something that's hardly ever come up again, and that is what you decided to do with the reactor at Arak. I thought that that was an incredible step for you to take, and you did take that. And so I defended the deal. I thought it was a very bad idea for the Trump administration to get out of the deal. But now that the United States is out of the deal, the problem that I have in terms of getting back or how to get back, quite frankly, are the revelations of the so-called Iran nuclear archive. And I must say, when I first heard those, I dismissed it mostly as Israeli propaganda. However, when I read an analysis from a couple of American groups, I must say it was really disconcerting in terms of the past activities of Iran. And so what I'm asking, help me how to defend why we should now go back in, when at least I have some difficulties with that.
Minister Fahmy, the final question.
First of all, thank you. This is an excellent panel, as have been the others. I had a reservation regarding the deal from the very beginning, mostly because, whether it's the 5+1 or Iran, both of you almost completely ignored the region. The briefings were very superficial in terms of what was happening. That being said, I think withdrawing from the deal is a worst response you can possibly think of. My suggestion, since, Anton, at the beginning you said, what can we do to move forward rather than to place the blame? I would argue that as complicated as this may be, we should actually set a larger target and try to arrange some reverse engineering from that target down to the JCPOA. And my position is we should try to create a zone free of nuclear weapons from throughout the Middle East, set the technical issues that need to be addressed as well as the political ones, and let's see how we can walk back from there, creating incentives, disincentives to where we are now. One issue, for example, which would be dealt with, which has come up repeatedly, the issue of means of delivery and the issue of verification. I don't think you're going to get the Trump administration or Iran, frankly, to make an about-face given where they are on the JCPOA, and I'm not going to debate their position. But I do believe that it serves the Middle East interests as a whole, Arab and non-Arab, and frankly, international security, that we look for a larger target and try to work backwards and try to find common ground, irrespective of who's elected or not elected in upcoming elections. Thank you.
Thank you. I will give the floor in reverse order. So the first, Dr. Araghchi, could you speak? Then Ambassador Fu, and then Deputy Prime Minister Ryabkov.
Well, to answer the question about the so-called nuclear archive, this is not nuclear archive. This is Netanyahu archive. And this is actually a very fabricated story. How come that we, or any country, would put its secret nuclear archive at the middle of a desert so Netanyahu's elements can come and pick them up and take them back to their country, out of Iran? It looks funny, and it is a funny story. We dealt with the question of possible military dimension of Iran's nuclear program during the negotiations. That was a serious file opened in the IAEA. Many questions raised by the IAEA about this possible military dimension of Iran's program. We cooperated with the agency. We answered all those questions. We addressed all those concerns, one after another, and we have came to a conclusion with the IAEA that there has been no military dimension in Iran's program, except some small findings by the agency that we didn't accept. But as a matter of fact, the Board of Governors decided to close this case, and we have a resolution which closed the PMD, or possible military dimension, case, and we are not ready to reopen that file again. This is a very well calculated plot to kill JCPOA, and we don't fall into that trap. I hope other participants, I hope the agency also, would not fall into that trap. On Middle East nuclear-free zone, Iran has been actually one of the pioneers of this idea. We still support this idea, especially when it came up in the NPT review conference. We have supported that, but you know what is the problem, that why this idea is not realizing.
Ambassador Fu, Cong?
Yes, on the PMD, we share the view that actually the IAEA has closed the file, and that is also a conclusion that we support. So that's very clear in our minds. And on the regional dialogues, indeed, we support regional dialogues, dialogues between regional countries, and we also urge, in my opening remarks, that countries outside the region should facilitate rather than antagonize or to make the situation more complicated. And in terms of the weapons of mass destruction free zone, China is in full support of that effort.
Thank you. Sergey Alexeyevich.
Спасибо.
Thank you very much.
In the Middle East, I will stress our full commitment to a successful conduct of the forthcoming conference related to the issue, which is due to start now on November 18th. Ambassador Ulyanov, who is present in this hall, will lead our delegation there. We are hopeful that other countries, including co-sponsors of the resolution of 1995 that indefinitely extended NPT, will still have an opportunity to consider how important it would be for them also to send their representatives. Meanwhile, we are discouraged by information on how some of the important players are working behind the scenes to undermine this effort and put question about the relevance of the conference and eventually on the whole concept of this endeavor. We in Russia look into it from a perspective that is mostly related to our desire to ensure continued implementation of the NPT in its entirety. We know the regime is experiencing stresses of all sorts, and one of these stresses is exactly the lack of any progress on full implementation of that resolution. So instead of trying to defeat the case, those who claim they stand firm with the basic compact of the non-proliferation treaty should unite forces with us and others to ensure that this will be a beginning of a successful journey towards an establishment of the WMD-free zone in the Middle East, irrespective of how long it might take. And by the way, we very consistently call the State of Israel to join NPT, and we do so at all opportunities available for us. We don't believe we target too high. We think it's a matter of principle to ensure that the international system is functional. On regional issues and dialogue, I think the only sentence to add is we will work together and coordinate with all interested parties, be it regional or non-regional ones, in order to ensure that there is a workable and valid political and diplomatic alternative to the course of confrontation which is pursued by some.
Thank you. Please join me to thank all three panelists. At this point, the final plenary of the conference is over. So I would like to thank our media for joining us for this plenary and for covering what was going on at the conference during 2+ days. The conference will be over in a few minutes, so I would appreciate if participants will stay while media is leaving the room for the final words, and I will try to keep them short. First, I would like to thank our partners who made this conference possible: UN Office for Disarmament Affairs, CTBTO Preparatory Commission, Russian Foreign Ministry, Russian State Nuclear Corporation Rosatom, European Leadership Network, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland, Federal Department of Foreign Affairs of Switzerland, Foreign Ministry of the Netherlands, Foreign Ministry of Norway, Gorchakov Fund, Nuclear Threat Initiative, and Friedrich Ebert Foundation. Please join me to thank our partners. Please also join me to thank our interpreters who help us to understand each other during 2+ days of the conference. We also have volunteers who, most of whom are students either of the Moscow Engineering Physics Institute, MEPhi, or Moscow State Institute of International Relations, MGIMO. I hope that one day volunteers will be from that side of the conference room, will be at the podium, because most of them are studying non-proliferation or international security. So please join me to thank them. And also, please join me to thank my team.
And Anton Khlopkov.
Special thanks goes to Dmitry Konokhov, conference director, and Asya Shevrova. We are quite small, but I think we made it, and I appreciate your participation very much. You stayed with us for 2 days. You were very generous. Special thanks goes to our senior panelists for joining us very late evening on Saturday, but I think now it's time to get rest and to join our families. Thank you.